Good morning, Breakfast with Bacon fans. I have brought back the very popular Dr. Dan Schneider. He is an author and a speaker, and he is a professor of theology. Most of you are familiar with him because he is, I know that you may not say this, Dan, but it's the way I'd like to tell you people who you are, one of Father Chad Ripperger's right-hand men in terms of helping him with exorcisms. He was on this show before when we talked about his latest work, the Liber Christo Method. What's the tagline on that book, Dan?
Manual for Spiritual Combat.
And it, I would like to report, is good and bad, is sold out. It was sold out immediately. As Dr. Dan and I were talking before we went on the air, people want solutions, and it's a book of solutions and not just a book on problems. And while we're not specifically going to talk about that book today, it really got us started when we went off the air last time, and I begged him to come back. And we want to talk today about really something that's in that book, and it's authority structure. How does that apply in exorcisms? How does that apply in our faith? How does that apply in our lives and our marriages, and the fact that society is all chaotic? So I guess I could go on and on, but Dr. Dan Schneider, thank you so much for agreeing to come back.
No, thank you for having me. I really enjoy your show, and it's always a pleasure.
Wow. So let's kind of jump right in here. You and I, before we went on the air, started talking about my ministry. So we, having this quick intro, my ministry about people who are standing for their marriages while their spouse has cheated on them, has divorced them. And these people are standing on their vow that till death do us part. So as we got going with that, we started talking about how people are oppressed. If I say, well, I'm standing for my marriage, let me tell you, just talked to a recent person, a client whose husband left her and he's attacking her. Her siblings are attacking her. And the siblings that I was telling Dr. Dan, one of them had left his wife and had married the other woman and had a child with her. And he gets visibly angry when he sees his sister still wearing his ring and her ring. And he says, "You're not married anymore." And so Dr. Dan and I were talking about the fact that that really riles up in someone the fact that the light of Christ shining through her is really shining in the darkness. And so, Dr. Dan, you kind of took that in the direction saying that's exactly what we're talking about today, isn't it? Or at least part
really
of it.
is. It's the authority structure is an objective reality, and it's something that is, the demon only works in the objective. We need to understand that when you're dealing with the diabolic, he only works in the objective, and he wants to drive us to make decisions and to try to defend our actions, etc., or in the subjective. Well, God knows my intentions, but he works completely in the objective, and he works according to the rules that God has established. Where the Revelation 12, it says that the devil stands before the throne of God, accusing the brethren day and night. Well, what is he accusing them of? He's accusing them of all those areas of their life that we've given permissions to the demon. We might subjectively say, "Oh, well, God knows my intentions. He knew I didn't mean that." We make all sorts of excuses for ourselves, but we're very quick to accuse others. But remember, one of the titles of the devil is the accuser. And what is he accusing us of? Those times that we've done any areas of thought, word, and deed, particularly our actions and our speech, that are contrary to the indelible mark of baptism and all the reality of what that means. And so that's kind of the objective reality of it. And the authority structure is based itself on natural law, the way God has established us. And it's not a popular topic today, but it's an area that is critical to spiritual combat. Just last weekend or yesterday at my local parish, the priest our pastor was preaching on the authority structure, and because it stems, of course, from the gospel reading with St. Peter and the keys of the kingdom. And so we see that there's authority structure embedded, but then he goes into the authority structure of the church over the diabolic forces. And the fact that we're hearing this in the average parish and the average Catholic parish across the country shows that the work of Father Ripperger and Mr. Kyle Clement and my work involved with them as well, we're starting to get people to understand the power and truth of the authority structure and why that's critical in spiritual combat and in marriage and a successful marriage.
It's funny because I am 58 years old, born in 64, raised in late 70s, but I'd say mostly the 80s. And part of the same generation, it's like, don't have any man tell you what to do. You can open your own car door. You can do anything, right? I am woman, hear me roar.
Yeah.
And so it seemed appealing, kind of, but also that, you can get a job. And I'm a German Polish person. And I've learned that the German work ethic is something people, look at here. They're like, oh, you Germans, man. So I love working. So this idea that I could get a job and then I have my kids, it was very appealing, but there was never a day where I would go to work where I didn't miss my kids, or, we fight about who makes enough money or doesn't make enough, or so on and so forth. So I started seeing, not recognizing back then, how it was problematic, right? So as I've gotten into this ministry of standards, in one sense, you don't, as a woman in 2023, want to admit the patriarchy works. But in another sense, there's this piece when you really start looking at true authority, true obedience, your true place. When I fall into my place of, let Danny provide, I will be the one to take care of the house. I'm the one that's helping my grandchildren. I'm the one and I have great peace with that. So as I start imparting that to my standards, whether they're men or women, it seems to make sense all of a sudden. And we gravitate towards that, even though we're living in this world that says, what the heck are you doing? Women shouldn't be in the kitchen. Women should be in the boardroom, and men should be home raising kids. That just doesn't make sense to me. So speak to that. Are you finding that more and more in society, as people are recognizing that they're fighting it, or they're not fighting it? And when they don't fight it, do things seem to fall into place in a spiritual and a temporal manner? That's a long, convoluted question.
One of the phrases that we use is the demon militates to absurdity. And so we're seeing the absurdity of the breakdown, what used to be considered a mental disorder, a grave mental disorder of gender confusion or gender dysphoria, particularly the bodily mutilation that is now being not only promoted by our culture, but also advocated by our government and public school systems. So we see in the extreme of this, we see individuals now young individuals to be encouraged to change their gender, that gender is a social construct. It's not there. So once modernism attacked natural law, and once natural law no longer had any binding force, and it began with the breakdown of the family, and it began with the breakdown of traditional roles. Once that was completed, now there is nothing. Now there is nothing that cannot be determined and claimed to be a social construct like gender. So this is the foundation behind this whole gender ideology, but it goes way back. It goes way back, in all the way back to the very first in the scriptures, this part of the pantheon of the Egyptian gods. They were one of the main gods in Egypt, where the Israelites were as slaves, was the god of the great bisexual god, the great masturbator was his name, or the great he-she. This demon was called, because Psalm 96:5, the gods of the Gentiles are demons. So going all the way back, Deuteronomy 22:5, a man should not dress like a woman, or a woman like a man. So once in the modern time, we're fighting this ancient enemy, but the placement of the assault of modernism against natural law is very specific. And the unleashing is we're now living in the tail. We're looking at the beginning of the train wreck, culturally, that the effect of all this, and part of what's going to be our return, or our help, is to return back to our understanding of natural law and the authority structure.
What is the natural law then? Is the fact that a husband's the head of the family and the wife is that natural law, or is that God's law? If we go with that, for instance, because I know you're talking gender dysphoria, so that's natural law. Marriage is a little bit a subset as well. So which part is natural law?
Going back into it's natural law. It goes all the way back to creation, when God created Eve out of Adam. It doesn't mean she's inferior to him. It just means she wasn't taken from his head as a superior, not from his feet as inferior, but she was taken from his side as helpmate. That doesn't mean she's inferior. It just means God placed a natural order of things. And so, and going into the Ephesians chapter 5, people, when they invite me to speak at their parish or their conference, and they want to hear about spiritual warfare in Ephesians chapter 6 and all the cool weapons that we have, and I go into the Roman armament, what these weapons look like in ancient warfare. But before I get to Ephesians 6, I always say the preamble to Ephesians 6 is Ephesians 5, and that is where St. Paul talks about authority. Wives, be subordinate to your husband. And then we hear that and our ears go off, because we've all been washed in a very feminist, ultra feminist culture. And then husbands, and we ignore what husbands are called to. Love your wives as Christ loved the church, which means, he says, to die for her purity, for his bride. Christ died for his bride on the cross. And so that sacrificial love of dying for your bride, this is what the man is called to be. And so even that word, I think we discussed this last time on the show, the word upotasso, which means to be, it's a military term. And I work into the book a lot of military language because I was a military officer. So that's a military term that means to be ordered under. Upotasso is the Greek word. So it means that there's a structure and a hierarchy at place. It has nothing to do with merit. It has to do with office. And so when we would walk down the military post, and there would be 4 or 5 of us walking to whatever we were going, the senior ranking officer would always stand to the outside, so that, and then it was a hierarchy. The next ranking guy would be to his left and 1 step to the rear, the next guy and the next guy. So when you walk down, you could identify who was the senior ranking officer, who saluted who. Otherwise, you have 2 gaggles and nobody knows who's supposed to salute who. There's just order. It doesn't mean that if the guy to my right is my superior in rank, it doesn't mean that he's a better soldier or a better helicopter pilot than me, or he's in better shape. It just means that he has that office. And so authority flows through office. So this is all that means. And in fact, that it's also a military term, upotasso, because Paul goes into an entire military in the next section, a whole armament, that of the Roman legionnaire of his day. That word means to be under the protection of. Under the protection of. It's as if the man or anyone in authority, they're given a shield and a sword, and they are to put their wife and their children and behind them, and they're the first one to make contact with the enemy. The enemy yields to that. The enemy yields to the authority of whatever the structure is. The first thing that the demon's going to yield or not yield on 3 things. It isn't because of our good looks or our PhD or MD. It has nothing to do with our advanced degrees. It has nothing to do with our intellect or the gifts that we may so-called believe we have. The demon's going to yield or not yield on 3 basic things. Number 1, does it support the requisite authority of the person, the place, of the object? Number 2, what is the state of merit?
Can you say that again? There was a glitch. So I want to make sure.
Does this person have the authority, the requisite authority of the person, the place, or the object? He's going to yield or not yield on that. You might get movement, you might light stuff up, but me going into somebody else's property and trying to drive demons out of that property, that the demon recognizes instinctively who.
So kind of the authority of role is first.
It's order. It's order.
Order. Okay.
I'm sorry. But it flows from office, the office of private property ownership by natural law. Used to be before communism, right?
Right.
The church has always defended the right to property ownership through natural law. We have a right to property ownership. So if you own the property, you have a temporal and spiritual authority over that property.
Got it.
The second question the demon's going to ask is, what is the state of merit? What is the state of merit? So you have, you work with couples that are going in crisis, right? So I can pray, or you can pray for one of your couples. And you say, let's say you've got a husband who committed adultery, right? And they pray for, and I pray for him, or you pray for that guy. Hey, Lord, bless this man, bring in the light of truth. However we pray for him. That's beautiful and it's meritorious, but there's more merit when the wife who has a greater claim by natural law, has a greater claim by that relationship, who has been offended acutely by that, there's more merit in her prayer than mine or yours. So a priest who is offended by his bishop, when he, it could be something minor, right, but that offense, there's more merit in that forgiveness than the one not under that, than
That it would be for me praying for that priest.
And it would for you and I praying for our
Right.
bishop. Lord, please forgive our bishop for what he did or whatever. And then finally, the specificity is being specific in how we pray. But it all begins with that authority structure. And we've seen this play out over the years working. I've seen it visibly over the years playing out in dealing with cases week in and week out. Part of the grind of Liber Christo, what we do with Father Ripperger, is it isn't just having a weekend seminar and driving demons out. This is a week in, week out grind. And me being a former cav officer and a scholar, I'm constantly just watching and catching these patterns, and these things pattern out. And I can just tell you, you can see a priest in a formal rite, the formal exorcism, places his stole on a woman, who is possessed. Visible bodily reaction. The husband places his hands on her and prays for her. It emits the same reaction.
Wow.
So that authority is felt. The demon knows that authority, and my hands are not anointed, and my hands have nothing to do with this person, because there is no bodily union between me and this person, whereas the bodily union between husband and wife is so profound, the two become one flesh. And so the authority structure and the right ordering is very critical. That area needs to be cleaned up. On the turn side, I was speaking with a woman once after a conference, and she was talking about, she was a very successful woman, extremely driven, successful, and she wants to make her marriage work. And she said, my husband he's on the internet all night long. I have no idea what he's watching. I can only imagine. He plays video games 2 or 3 hours a day. She said, I totally understand. I would submit to any man in marriage, but I have a hard time submitting to a boy. So I'm always focusing on men. If you're still looking at playing video games and looking at dirty magazines, you don't make your bed, you're soft, you don't want to exercise, you're a boy, you're not a man. And it's very difficult in that situation for the authority structure to get at work. So we have to get the man to start exercising his authority, and it isn't over the woman. It's authority of sacrifice. It's authority of engagement. It's who engages the enemy first. Who's the spiritual leader? That structure needs to get replaced. It isn't who's most intelligent or who has the most merit or who's the holiest. It comes through office.
Wow. I try not to look down and write notes, and I'm trying to keep it in my head, but I've got so many things that this has evoked in me. Okay. So if we go with your military, because my husband's retired naval officer, so I get the structure. I worked with the military myself. And so I think so many of us, again, specifically women and men as well, but specifically women, have a hard time with this authority structure because society's told us that we should. So I think about and you, obviously, military officer, you have met officers that outrank you, that are so good, you would die for them. You would take a bullet for them, right? And you could probably name him or her right now. And you've probably met those officers who outrank you, who you just as soon, throw in a river, right? So the role doesn't mean the quality of the leader, right? So I've had one of those when I teach in my leadership courses. A good leader gets the job done. A great leader gets the job done and brings the people along with him, right? I want to take a bullet. So in this picture you formed in my head, assuming a JO, junior officer, for those not familiar with the military, you got this young JO kid who's just come out of the college, and he's, 22, 23, and he outranks all the enlisted members. But you see in him immediately greatness, right? I mean, he's just one day going to be a great leader. He's a 01. Let's just say he's an 01. And he is subordinate to the 04 or the 05. And let's assume for this analogy, the 04 is inept. He just is a horrible leader. Now, if they were on the field and they were fighting together, I know you're a helicopter guy, but we'll pretend you're boots on the ground, right? If you're on the field and this fantastic leader, J.O., says, I'm taking over, you're a moron, follow me, the other men, even though they may or may not likely have good respect for him, they are going to know who to follow. Some are going to follow the 04 because he is in authority, the rightful leader, and some are going to want to follow the old one because he's just good at it. But so when you were talking about that, I was like, oh my gosh, that's what we're doing in our marriages, in our society, because my husband, and this isn't my husband, but my husband metaphorically may be an awful spiritual leader right now. But that doesn't make me, as the wife, if I decide to start taking over and taking power and delegating and telling him what to do and telling the kids what to do and saying, don't listen to him, listen to me, that is not going to work either, because it creates the same type of chaos. That was like a light bulb when you were speaking of that. Is that kind of what you're looking at in society, going, yes. So our job, as you just alluded to, is to build up that 04 as best as we can to make him a good leader, so that we can each rightfully follow him? Or would we do something else with that 04 in this example?
Yeah, at the end of that excursion and that engagement, that 01 and everyone that followed him would face legal ramifications for that, even if they were successful in combat, because the rules still apply in combat. Now, if the 04 is giving unjust laws, if the 04 says, the My Lai incident, and says, I command you to kill these civilians, then you have a right to, you have the obligation not to follow. But that structure is in place. I remember my first area flight check. It was the area observation flight, where they give you a flight of the area, where I was when I first got into Saudi Arabia. And you could get into an aircraft with a and in the Army, the warrant officers are the more seasoned pilots, and the commissioned officers, we have a lot more staff and other duties. So we would always call the warrant officers E4s with O Club cards. They're low enlisted guys with long mustaches that somehow get into the officers club, but they're fantastic pilots. And sometimes you might do something really stupid. And on the ground, I still outrank him in the air on the ground, but there's one pilot in command. Even though I would be the senior officer, that pilot in command is in charge of that aircraft. And the conversation would go like this: sir, and then there'd be a string of curse words. If you ever do that again, and then blah, 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 and then sir, So he very knew they would be very respectful to invoke the title sir and recognize my rank. But in the aircraft, they're absolutely in charge of that aircraft because of the office of pilot in command. 3 weeks ago, in the office of reading, St. Ambrose was writing, we were reading St. Ambrose's some of his catechesis for catechumens. And he says, when you stand before the water and you look at the priest, do not consider his outward appearance, but his office. He who stands before you is Peter and Paul. Even more, he is like Elijah, calling fire down from heaven because of his office. Has nothing to do with his merit. We understand this instinctively as Catholics. I have pretty good Latin, right? I have pretty good Greek. So probably better Latin than my pastor. I probably have better public speaking skills. So I could go pray the Eucharistic canon better than him. I could probably deliver a more perfectly academic anyway, a homily, but I could pray until the cows come home. But the form and matter are violated. The bread and wine will.
You'll never be able to consecrate it, right?
Because I don't have the office, and with the office comes the charism and the ability to do that. So that's the first one. Remember that the authority structure has two ends: to provide and to protect. And so when the authority and women, especially those who come to us for help in the church for diabolic issues, women instinctively know that they're not protected, particularly when their husband's addicted to pornography, or when they've committed and had an affair, fornication. They're not engaged. They sense a certain vulnerability because they're not getting the spiritual protection that they should. If you're a parish priest and you've got a bishop that is
not nice,
compromised, that parish priest is also lacks a little bit of protection. He's going to have to up his prayer life and be very careful. The same thing for when you have that breakdown in the home. So you have to provide and to protect. And then the temptations are always going to be for those in authority to abdicate, and those outside of authority, under authority, to usurp. So that's going to be the constant tension. It goes back to the fall of Adam and Eve. That is embedded into our fallen nature. The word after the what's the so-called curse of Eve, right? Besides childbirth, what my wife says she's going to have a talking to with Eve as soon as we get to heaven, because of the pain of childbirth, right? And me, for the sweat of my brow. She's saying, I'll take sweat of the brow. I have childbirth, and working women have childbirth and the sweat of the brow. So that word,
tell your wife I'd like her.
Yeah, your urges towards your husband, right? Your urge shall be, and he will dominate you. He will domineer you. So that tension is going to be the urge. That Greek word for urge, it's only used in 2 other places, and it's actually use 2 different Hebrew words to describe that one Greek word, which can mean either your urge will be to dominate, to bear upon on top of your husband, or it could mean to turn and flee. So oftentimes we hear that word and it's like, yeah, he's a big knucklehead, but I love him anyway. And somehow I see all his faults, but I still find myself hanging around. He's a decent guy deep down. That's
not what it meant.
The instinct, the fallen, the Eve instinct, the fallen Eve instinct is to dominate or to just run from. Right. And the male's instinct, right? The man's fallen instinct is to not engage, just like Adam, because at the fall of Adam, at the fall, it wasn't Eve all alone and Adam was out there, praying before the throne of God. Scripture says that, and Adam was with her, and he was silent. And so the husband, we see that there's a scene in The Incredibles, right? If you have kids, you've watched The Incredibles, which is a great movie for parents too, for grown-ups, as all good movies are, kid movies. So there's a scene where Mr. Incredible, they're in the kitchen, the kids are running wild and fighting, and Mrs. Incredible says, would you engage? There's just chaos, and she's just asking her husband to please engage. And so we see that temptation for the man to be silent, like Adam, to not engage in the home. That's the tension that we're constantly at sword's point, until grace comes in and restores that brokenness in that relationship.
I'm sorry that I keep turning this to marriage, but it's just exactly exemplifying that which we are seeing in our society. And there's a beauty when we turn things back the way they are, because what I try to convince women is it doesn't mean you become a doormat when you submit to your husband's headship. It's the difference between a welcome mat versus a doormat, is what we use a lot. You're not a doormat. If you are being a good submissive wife, you're still giving him your wisdom, your insights, your opinions. Here's what I think we should do. And, just for the sake of this, I don't know how much you know, but the difference between the male and the female brain, you have the left hemisphere, the right hemisphere, and then this corpus callosum down the middle, which I call the freeway system, which sends the messages from the left brain to the right brain. Our brains are the same for a time, but in the wound, the male baby gets a shot of testosterone, which singes these pathways in the corpus callosum, which means his left hemisphere doesn't send signals to the right hemisphere. So he thinks of something and he can stay singularly focused, which is why I think men should go to war and not women, right? Because I see my target, see my enemy go there. I'm not thinking about the wife and kids at home. I just got to get my target. Well, women have this ability to, if you're talking to your wife, honey, can we talk about the bills? Well, she's going to make a connection from the bills to the kids to your in-laws. By the way, we got to go buy bananas at the store, and all these connections. So I try to instruct women. God did this on purpose. He's saying, women, you have so much to offer. And gentlemen, you need to recognize that I made her brain able to do something your brain can't do.
Right.
It is able to make relationships. But then, as you were just saying, but then I can't say, see, I know more. God also said, but then women, I want you in humility to defer to your husband. He's got to defer in a sense to his pride, and realize, not defer to his pride, lose his pride, right? And recognize, okay, I do need to listen to my wife. I need to love her. I need to respect her thoughts, her opinions. But ultimately then, A good wife is like, honey, here's what I feel. Here's how it's good for you, good for me, good for the family. Now make a decision. And then she has to respect whatever decision he makes. And so that's the beauty, is we look at authority as if that's the person with all that, the joy and the happiness. And that's terrifying, I would think. If you're the one that has to make a decision for your wife, your kids, everybody, what if it goes wrong? It falls on you. So I see this symbiotic relationship. Can you speak to that?
So what my wife would, to sum up what you just said about the difference between the male and the female brain, she says that every man has the clueless gene to some degree or another. Some are more clueless than others, but we're just wired differently. Accept that. We're wired differently. Another image that comes to mind is you remember that movie, My Big Fat Greek Wedding?
I love that movie.
Great movie. I think they got a little radical. They killed a good. They blew up a good thing, But the first one was really a fantastic movie, and everybody in my family, everybody seems to have married Italians, and so it might as well be a big fat Italian wedding because it's very similar.
Mm-hmm.
And there's one scene where the daughter wanted to go to school and the father didn't want her to.
My favorite scene. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so she's lamenting to the mom, yeah, I know I want to go to school, but dad doesn't want me. And the man is the head of the household. And she's just kind of very upset. And the mom very wisely says, yes, it is correct. The man is the head of the household, but the woman is the neck, and she can move the head in any direction. Now, not through manipulation, because a woman instinctively knows that as well. I have seen priests be seduced and taken out of ministry, and the guys in our friend group was like, I can't believe he was so stupid, right? He had the clue that he was blind to that. He should have seen that coming. And then the wives of our group that we used to have this prayer group with this priest, the wives were instantly like, she knew exactly what they didn't even look at him. She knew that she could manipulate. So we're not talking about manipulation. And we're talking about a grace-filled, loving moving of love, right? And it's working together, the head and the heart. The head and the heart are two different things, because sometimes I want to make a decision because it's very rational, and I have no idea why my wife is so opposed to it. And then because I don't feel it, I don't get it, I don't engage at that level, and so we have to learn to communicate. And that's the whole process of marriage. God puts two radically different people that are polar opposites on all things, hopefully, except values. At least they have common values in the Catholic faith. And they says, now eat from the same trough for 60 years, and over time, you just use each other's tails to swat flies away, and you're just kind of grinding it out. And but the demon is constantly trying to distort in the imagination. I like what you said about the left brain and the right brain. Something that Dr. Joe Lepetsky, who works, he's part of our consultant board with Father Ripperger and the Society of Our Most Sorrowful Mother. He's part of the mental health professionals that we consult with. He gave a presentation to our teams last year, and he was talking about back brain and front brain. Mm-hmm. The back brain images, that's going to be large concepts. That's going to be
theoretical things, geometry, and
right. Yeah. And oftentimes that's where we seem to get hit in the back of the head by the demon. He draws us and he tells us it's always going to be this way. She's thinking this about you. He doesn't appreciate you. And he pulls you into the back brain and this larger picture stuff. And it's always been this way. And he starts to distort what's in the imagination. And so Dr. Joe said, this is a fact from medical science, which I found fascinating. He said that 60 seconds of front brain cogitation, and we're not talking about prayer. Think about prayer,
right,
in light of this, but detailed thinking for 60 seconds on anything, detailed thinking like we're doing right here, detailed thinking, Fighting Irish playing this Saturday, or your favorite football team, just detailed thinking for 60 seconds. Has the equivalent effect of one dose of a antidepressant or anti-anxiety med. So the power of the brain, and so the demon is constantly manipulating, distorting our images, distorting our image of each other. The first thing he does in a marriage is begin to chisel away at our perceptions. And so having getting control of your imagination is also part of the structure. And basically, whenever you get a negative thought about someone, you know, particularly your husband or your wife, you have to just assume it's probably diabolic. You have to just ignore that, right? But that focused thought, and then when you apply it to prayer, really is effective in the brain to help to stop those distorted images. And the last thing too is the commonality between us and the priesthood. For example, a priest is ordered to sacrifice. Everything he does is ordered to sacrifice. The Eucharist, the Eucharistic sacrifice, everything his hands do are sacrificial and priestly. The commonality to the laity is a spirituality of sacrifice, learning to offer your suffering for the other. This is critical. If you want to be a successful sacred stander, it's going to be offering your suffering, because your suffering, particularly if you have been wounded and betrayed, your suffering is more meritorious and more Christ-like than anyone else in the world. And so that spirituality of sacrifice is very important. Too often, somebody has a conversion, a guy has a conversion. It's like, oh my gosh, he goes to mass every weekend now. Maybe he should be a permanent deacon, and right when a time, and I'm not knocking the permanent diaconate, but right when a time when he should start engaging in his home, that Mr. Incredible moment, please engage. He gets diverted and he puts all of his spiritual energy into the parish and not focusing on his family at home. That's very critical for the Christian family to watch out that temptation, to watch for that temptation.
That is, I never really heard of that, but makes perfect sense. You are right. We take these holy men and we're like, oh, but you should be in church. And I love that you brought up this concept of sacrifice, because, and you're going to correct me because I believe it's the Latin, the word sacra, which means holy, and ficia, which means to make. Sacrificia, sacrifice, means to make holy. And I will teach that all the time to my couples, that your job is to make your husband holy. Men, your job is to make your wife holy. Your job is to get each other to heaven. And we do it in a symbiotic way, but with the men is learning to sacrifice as the head. And maybe you should speak to this, because you are a man and I'm not, right? So a man, it seems, is like this domination, but so many men I work with don't know how to do that, because they're like, well, I'm the man, I got to be the head. And I'm like, I don't really know if I'm doing it right, but I got to make some decisions. And then, and the women, we don't have a problem following, but we do when we're told. But this idea that, let me rephrase it. When I teach my premarital classes, there's not a single woman, when I say it this way, if you knew that every single decision your husband ever made, from where you lived to the restaurants you went to where your kids are going to school, to every decision in your entire 80 years of marriage was based on making you happy, would you have a problem following that? And they're like, no, I have no problem letting him lead. And so then talking to the men, that's what your wives want. We don't want to be dominated. We want you to sacrifice and that's where I want you to fill in the blanks. What do you think a man wants most, that he's kind of fighting this desire to make a wife happy? What would your answer be there? And first, am I correct on this? Because I think I am.
I think you're tracking correctly. Yeah. Yeah. A friend of mine is another one of my veteran buddies. Went downrange multiple times, and so he's this big hulking ex-MP tough guy. And for whatever reason, he and his wife took a tango dance classes, and so what he said, I made an interesting observation, is that the guys that knew how to lead, because you change partners, for practice purposes, right. The guys that knew how to lead this dance, the women waited in line to go dance with them. They didn't want to have to stumble over each other's feet and take turns trying to lead and not lead. The women were trying to were
attracted to the man who knew how to lead.
Knew how to lead, yeah. And it isn't knuckle dragging. It isn't, come here, woman. You know what I mean? It's a leadership of love. It's a leadership of sacrifice. What's interesting too, the word agape is the Greek word. It's really a Christian invented word. You don't really see this word outside of in antiquity, apart from its introduction in the New Testament. There's multiple words in love in Greek, for love in Greek. In English, we've got love. I love burritos. I
Pizza,
love
this purse, my
pizza.
kids, the
I love my
dog.
wife.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always tell my wife, I love my wife's kids. When I'm mad at them, they're my wife's kids. I even love them.
When they're my
So
kids.
they're my kids too. But yeah, I love watching the Buckeyes play football. You know, and in
Right.
Greek, it's very specific. You've got phileo, which is
Brotherly love.
brotherly love and affectionate love. Eros isn't just sexual love. It's an embrace that raises us up. That the embrace of Eros philosophically, Plato says that Eros sprouts wings. So when you embrace in Eros, you become higher, you fly higher. The opposite of Eros is Thanatos, death, that which pulls us down. You know, so filial is it's a deep, a love, abiding friendship love, you know. And so when Peter, after the resurrection, Jesus says, "Do you love me?" He says, "Do you love me, agape?" And Peter answers, "I really like you, filio." And Jesus asked him again, "Do you love me, agape?" Peter answers, "I really, really like you, filio." Because Peter knew what he was asking.
Yeah.
And then finally, Jesus lowers him to where he was at. "Do you filio me?" "Yes, Lord, I filio you. Feed my lamb, feed my flock, etc." And then immediately says, when you were young, you went where you wanted. When you're older, you will be led to places you don't want to go. This referring to the type of death he would suffer, where Peter was crucified. Sacrificial love is the essence. And husbands, agape, don't just really like them because then things will go better for you. Agape, sacrificial love, as Christ died for the church. And that same word for agape, wives, love your husbands, right? And women learn agape, Paul tells, I think it's in Timothy, through childbirth. There's something that men could not understand, you know. Whenever you hear that, and you want to trigger a woman, you tell a woman, "Hey, how hard could childbirth be?" Right? They're like, "What?" You know, try passing, a baseball,
a watermelon
through this or that. Yeah, and so, but in that, it's amazing the power and strength of a woman and the love of a woman that would be willing to do that more than once. You know. And so, and St. Paul says that women learn love, they have agape through childbirth. And so you instinctively understand sacrificial love. Men, like Adam, instinctively don't want to engage, instinctively do not want to bear the cross. And so we have to mortify that. Men have to learn. I mean, I see these young guys today, they're yoked. You know, they're tough guys. They got cool beards. I couldn't grow a beard. I would look like Joe Dirt. I would look half Amish if I grew a beard. You know, if that were today's standard, I would not be a man's man.
You'd be beat up.
Yeah. I'd be beat up. Yeah. It's not about bourbon and cigars and beards, and that's not masculinity. It's the interiority. It's the toughness. It's the ability to suffer and bear the cross. That's a man. It has nothing to do with who picks out who's more intelligent. I'll sit in the closet before mass and go, "I don't know what to wear today." My wife would just go, pick here, do that. That looks nice on you. Oh, okay. That doesn't mean I'm not a weak. That doesn't mean I'm weak. We're talking about the office of head of household and engaging the enemy. And how do we engage him? The best way, through sacrifice, a sacrificial love. And we learn that, right? We learn that we are led to where we are not want to go, just as Peter had to die. As Christ died for the church, Peter dies for the church. And so did the first, 18 of the first 20 popes, right? It was a death sentence to accept the mitre of pope. And so it is a death sentence as well to accept the cross of marriage. It's you're signing your own death warrant. You're signing a blank check in your own death warrant because you're called to that level of sacrificial love. At the end of our lives, the Lord isn't going to say to me, "Dan, how many copies of that book did you sell? Because that was a really cool book. How many talks did you give? How many audiences did you present? You know, how many souls did you bring into heaven?" He's not even going to ask me that. He's going to say, "Dan, let's talk about your wife and your kids. Did you do everything you possibly could to bring them to me? Did you reflect the Father's love to them?" That's a big cross. That's a hard cross. You know, that's a very difficult cross for a man, which is why most men don't want to engage it.
That is just so beautifully stated, because when the Bible says men love your wives, women respect your husband, you just made this connection between loving your wife. That's true authority. Right. If we're sticking with authority, you will have the most power when you love her. And what is love? Patience. What is love? When you're kind to her. What is love? When you don't keep record of wrongs. What is love? When you're not rude. What is love? Right? So God is saying to you, gentlemen, do not be rude. Do not be unkind. Do not be impatient when she's still put on her 14th outfit and keeps trying to find the right shoes and you're honking the horn because you got to get to church. And so what I always like to point out is, so this authority thing, you're doing the holy theological thing, and I'm kind of doing the secular stuff that goes with it, is that I always loathed that phrase that said happy wife, happy life, until I did my own research. And I realized as I go, there's this chapter in my book that's called the oxytocin testosterone cycle. So what's your wife's name? Vicky. So Dan, every time you do something nice for Vicky, right? It's like, I am a man. I like please wife. I do good thing. Caveman. Right. Proud of myself, right? So right. You do something good for your wife that makes her happy. It will make her oxytocin go up, right? Your efforts. And I'll come back to her simple role in here is to tell you what a good job you did, right? Thank you. And then when you know that two things, your wife is happy, and the second thing, that you are the source of her happiness, you actually get a dose of testosterone. Testosterone is a man's happy hormone. Of all the hormones he has, that's the one that makes him happy. It's the one that makes him strong. That's the one that makes him focused. It's the one you need elevated when you're at war. It is the one that helps you move mountains. So in this cycle that God created, it's saying, man please wife, wife is happy, man gets testosterone, so he has more energy to do more things for her. It's a beautiful cycle. And that's what I teach in my classes. That's what the repayment for God saying, Dan, I'm going to make you the head of your household. It's going to suck. It's not going to be easy. They're not always going to accept your leadership willingly. But when you seek to please her over yourself, you are going to reap a physiological benefit, which is testosterone. If the cycle goes backwards, if a woman's like, let me try to please my husband and I'll make him happy and I'll do something, we don't get the same. We don't get an extra dose of oxytocin, which is our happy hormone. And so this is God's way of saying, ladies, you're wired to do that. It's no sacrifice, as you just pointed out. There's no sacrifice for you to love your husband. What is sacrificial for you, ladies, is to respect him, is to recognize that I, the Lord your God, have put him the head of your household, and you have to sacrifice your own desire to, as you said, your urges to be over your husband. When I understood that happy wife, happy life thing made sense, Dan. You seek to make Vicky happy. Everything you do. Her role seems tiny, but it's huge. Her role, and all she wants is for you to install the French doors, right? And you can do that when this book is done, when this chapter is done. When you finally install those French doors for her, and she says, Dan, that made me so happy. Thank you so much. They look beautiful. That simple showing you of appreciation makes you feel like I am a conqueror, and that's what does it. So I tell the ladies all the time, all you have to do is tell him. Don't say, well, you should have done them 6 months ago.
Right. The second half of your question was, I forget how you phrased it, but what could a woman do? Ties right into that cycle you're talking about. And there's physiological explanations. And part of that is, I think it goes back to the primordial role of helpmate. That doesn't mean you're lesser any more than I was lesser than the guy that I outranked, that I flew with, that was a better pilot than me. I might have been a better pilot than him, but it's that role and of helpmate, and that a woman can say to her husband, I know you can install this door. You're so handy. I know you can do it, or she says, you have no idea what you're doing. You're going to screw up our house. It's going to look terrible. I mean, the smallest thing. I am the most confident, former military, fought in the ring many times, shot at in combat. I've been down life the hard way. I've seen it all. And it doesn't take but one word from my wife for me to go, man, maybe
I'm useless.
And you have no confidence. You could blow a man's confidence like that through a misspoken word. So what can a woman do to help? It's support him in that role, encourage him. You married him because of the good that you saw. First of all, you married him before God and others. He's the one that you participated with. He is your vocation, and vice versa.
Yeah. You chose him and forsook all others.
Right. And so encouraging your husband to do that. And it might take time. My wife has a good friend whose husband grew up Buddhist, and a very good man. And I overheard a conversation, and my wife was saying, "Oh, that is fantastic. I mean, it's not fantastic, but it's fantastic." Her husband, she hangs up, said, "What's going on?" And they've been married for 40 years or something. And he's a good man. He always encouraged her to go to church, but he finally has agreed, "I'm going to become Catholic." And it wasn't any logic that his wife said. Here's the 15 arguments of why Catholicism is superior to Buddhism. It's her living her Catholic faith and loving him and being patient. We see this role model this week. On Sunday, we celebrated St. Monica, and yesterday, St. Augustine, right? So people ask,
don't forget today it was St. John the Baptist who got his head chopped off for standing for it.
Right. So St. Monica, if you ask the question, I've heard people ask the question, did St. Monica's prayers make Augustine, her son, a saint? We don't know, but her prayers made her a saint. Mm-hmm. It was ultimately her prayer that brought her son around in God's time.
So are you saying, and I think I got you, so correct me. So are you saying the slightest bit of encouragement it has like the mustard seed effect? It
absolutely
may look,
does.
But it's huge in what a man can do.
Yeah, it's amazing. If Eve would have said to Adam, "I know that's a big old snake, but I've seen you wrestle. I know you can take that thing down. I believe in you." Adam would have maybe had a different reaction. But what the devil's constantly going to try to do is just beat a guy up to where he has no confidence, that he didn't think he can do it. David, as he goes, right before he goes to engage Goliath, who steps out but his brother, the oldest brother, the big handsome brother that got passed over. And he looks at him and says, "You're just looking for glory. You don't know what you're doing. That guy's going to rip you apart and leave your body for the birds of the air and the beasts of the field." Right? Because he just became a talking snake, or he just voiced the words of David's, probably his own temptations. And David, in faith, said, "The God that delivered me from the lion and the bear would deliver me from this Philistine." So David stayed focused, but the constant temptation is to tear a man down and to not give him the confidence that he needs. And the temptation for the man is just to dismiss. "Oh, she don't know what she's talking about. You're just a dumb girl," right? No, she's your wife, and she sees things from an angle that you do not see. So trust her. And so part of that communication and authority structure is the husband dies for his wife, but he listens to her. He loves her. Because right before that section on women submit to your husband, says submit to one another as well, right? There's a communication of love. It's just establishment of right roles. And so that is part of the key elements, but just being that helpmate and encouraging your husband, particularly when he may not have confidence. We were at a place and having a big barbecue, and it was all these hardcore Catholics. Jesse Romero and other people were all there, and the wife and her husband just threw a little barbecue for us. And the husband, he's Catholic, but he's a little not wanting to engage. He's not
at Jesse Romero and Dan Schneider level.
Yeah, exactly. So it came time to say grace, and so it was really awkward because everybody looks at him because we're all just like rat
your house, right? Yeah.
I'm not praying. There's no priest here. You have to pray. It's your house, brother. And he's like, "Oh man, no, I don't know how to do that." And he looked to his wife and he says, "Hey, would you just go ahead and say grace?" And I say, "Hey, no, let me show you how it's done." Because in my family, since I have a PhD, I'm Dan, the radical Bible man. Everyone thinks that because I have a PhD, I have to lead all the prayers. I said, let me give you a secret one that works powerful. All right. He's like, "All right." I said, "Just repeat after me. Repeat it after me." Everybody's looking around. I said, "All right. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen." Instantly, what do we do as Catholics? We bow. And I said, "All right, repeat after me. Bless us, O Lord, and these thy gifts." And then
we're about to receive.
"Through thy bounty, through Christ our Lord, amen." I said, "There you go, brother. You just led everybody in prayer. You didn't have to be anything fancy. It's just you're the guy that says, in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, amen. You make the sign of the cross first. Don't be afraid of that." But guys are so afraid of that, And
we
so,
women don't understand that. We women need to be reminded, because you look so strong. You look so confident. You look, and I think it was Dr. James Dobson's show I heard years ago. He's not a Catholic, but he's a good man. Men are like M&Ms. they're soft on the inside and hard on the outside, right? And women are the opposite. We look soft on the inside, but we're hard and strong. And so if we can get past that outer layer and realize our men need so much more, it would be, to me, terrifying to be the one to have to ask a girl on a date, and you're the one that gets rejected, and you're the one that has to make the decisions. So as women, so I always end my shows asking one question, but I ask you two, and unless you can incorporate it to what you were going to say there, but it's, basically name one thing you'd have women do differently as a result of something we talked about. Name one thing you'd have men do differently. But I think you might have something there you wanted to finish before you do that. But
no, I would say that's a great question. And as a guy, I'm a fixer, I want to fix stuff. And I see this dealing with cases, and we have to just recognize that the people that come to us because of diabolic affliction, we just God cycled them into our lives, and we're just going to hear and walk with them and mentor them. And so I have to watch. I have to watch the desire to fix it. Do these 5 things, okay, so I can move on to the next project. And the women are always tempted to love and to smother and to encourage, right, and have some little detachment. And so we have to watch those urges. I mean, those are good things; they're built into us. But if we each could do,
but if they're out of order, as you said.
Right. But the one thing that we can do, the pre-movements to our actual movements, is prayer. We forget that. Praying together is critical. The first thing that the devil does is to get us to stop praying together. That's the first step. And then stop praying for each other. And once we stop that, that's when the shield gets lowered. That's when our marriage becomes vulnerable, our children become vulnerable. Because once we stop praying together, now the demon can start working in the imagination and start changing and distorting your words, or I would say something, and the demon now, because we're not praying together, the demon can now distort that. Did you see the way he said that? He doesn't respect you. He didn't even listen to a word you said. So he can start projecting in that rash judgment. So even before we can start working on the relationship, we have to start praying for the relationship. So what can men do? They can pray more for their wives. Part of that prayer is offering up every small sacrifice for her, everything. You fire everything downrange, every inconvenience, every long red light, everything, every butt chewing you took at work today, every back pain you have, you offer those little things up for your wife, and vice versa. The wife prays for her husband. Continue constantly praying from her maternal heart praying for him. And that way. And so prayer for one another is the one thing that I say we don't do enough, and we need to do more of. And then let grace and let God and the grace of the sacrament of marriage do the rest, because this is what grace sacrament, we forget. Yeah, we know there's grace when we receive communion, or grace when we're baptized, but the grace of a sacramental marriage is present there. It just needs to be opened up and the obstacles to grace removed. And the first step to that movement is prayer. So praying for each other is very important.
Well, I'm convicted. I have my couples pray for each other, but I don't do it as much as I should all the time, because I'm like, oh, we're good. And then I don't, and I'm like, you know what? I need to pray for him. I need to pray for us. So thanks for convicting us and reminding me that I need to protect him. Give him that strength and give him that courage. So when the doctor needs motivating and education, thanks for sending me that info, Dr. Dan Schneider.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. It's always a pleasure.
This was supposed to be the end of the show, but I just can't help this last question that is on my brain. So when you guys are doing exorcisms, when Father's doing them and you're there to assist, right? And you talked about a married couple. Do you ever afterwards, when someone's been, what's the word? They've been relieved of that demon. Do you ever talk to them about authority in their marriage and making sure they make that right? Or
actually, it's the opposite. Before we get to prayer, as part of they use this book as the manual to work them through, so we have we had a case, for example, where it was a COVID case. It was pre-COVID, and then we came back, brought them back, and this is a particular case that would take 8 or 10 people to hold the person down, the woman down, when she would manifest, and that's common. But in our model, we stopped doing that, because by the time we spend months teaching them to pray. They're in a habitual state of grace. They're going to confession every week. They're going to church mass every Sunday. By the time we get to prayer, it's much more controlled. All this crazy theatrics aren't there. So I wasn't present to this case, and it came back. And so I suggested to the exorcist, look, her husband's here. They're in a state of grace. We've worked them through. When there is a manifestation, just have her husband lay his hands on his wife to pray for her. And so the priest starts, he does the ritual, the rite of exorcism, and there starts to be this manifestation. And Father says, husband, just lay your hands on her and just pray for her as I pray this prayer. We demystified the whole thing. And so it was perfectly controlled the entire time. And then afterwards, the lady came back very quickly. They walked down the hallway arm in arm. And the deacon we were working with said, "What did you do to these people?" And I said, "What do you mean, what do we do with them?" He said, 2 years ago when we had this, it was violent. It took 8 people to hold him down. And then it took her 45 minutes to kind of come to, and then they walked to the parking lot and she was literally punching her husband on the way to the parking lot. And you just said to her, "Hey, let's go. It's time to leave." She stands up, her husband puts his arm around her and they walk out. I said, because we're tapping into that grace of that marriage. We're tapping in and getting that back in order so that grace can flow. It isn't me. It isn't even the priest. It's allowing the grace of that marriage to go back into that construct to bring healing. And so that's a very, very, that was a big lesson for me, among others, on the importance of establishing that. And for the husband to learn, he has to engage. He can't just want to fix this and move on. He has to engage. He has to engage in this battle for his wife. And so teaching the husband, you need to engage. You're teaching the wife, let him engage, encourage him in this, and fight together.
Wow, there's so much I could say, but I suppose we should make that a next show instead of keeping this one into a 3-hour show. I am so blessed by the things you're taking, this ministry you have, author and speaker and theologian, and again, assistant in exorcisms, and then yet marriage, and you're changing society in a very tangible way. So what a blessing God has given to you and given to us through you. So I pray that your ministry and your vocation is strengthened through all of these threads that he's tying together in you and your military experience. So I will pray a prayer when we're done for your own marriage, that you can be the best leader that God ordained you to be, and that your wife will be the encouraging helpmate. And you guys can be that couple that you dreamt of on your wedding date as well.
Yeah. Oh, it's fantastic. And the graces are there and they're waiting for all of us. And it's just great to be in a great marriage and to have such a blessed to be a part of this. And to have this, and it doesn't mean there's not struggles. There's always struggles, because once you finish this section in life, you think you're done and you're not.
And then you empty nest, and you're like, oh no, I got to do it all over.
And then you got the caregiving parents and aging parents. So there's a constant cycle of life, but doing it together, shoulder to shoulder, and love, eating from the same trough for 60 years. These are the things we just got to keep grinding and battling it, together, and get each other to heaven. That's what ultimately we said. 31 years ago now, we agreed to get each other to heaven. Ultimately, that's what we signed up to do: get each other and our children to heaven the best we can.
If people want to find you, hire you for a speaking gig, get your book, hold up your book again, the Liber Christo Method.
The Liber Christo Method. It's on 10 books.
Right now, it's
there might be a few left on Amazon. I heard that there was 1 or 2, but I don't know. You could try Amazon. But 10 books, and you can always reorder them. LiberChristo.org. There's info at LiberChristo.org. The people there can send me connect to me if there's a speaking or whatever. But
excellent. And you do speak around the country or around the world, anywhere people want to hear this great information the Lord has imparted in you, correct?
Yes.
Excellent. All right. Well, I'd like it if you like and subscribe to my show as well, because God has blessed me with great guests like Dr. Dan Schneider and others, Jesse Romero, as we talked about. And I don't want to start naming them right now, but please, we need to get each other to heaven. We need to do our part. We need armament, and learning, starting with authority, is a good place to start for us. But like me on all my social media channels, go to my website, Breakfast with Bacon, subscribe to my newsletter. You can hire me to speak as well. Oh, I want to put out a conference that I am organizing October 28th here in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Our speakers are Father Robert Altier. He's the author of God's Plan for Your Marriage. We have Christine Watkins, author of the Warning, the Illumination of Conscience. Daniel O'Connor, Doug Barry, Alexis Walkenstein, Kevin Wells, and I am hopefully not forgetting anybody, forgive me, but go to truthspeakers.org and get your tickets now. You can sit with one of the speakers at that conference. If you forget all this information, but I'll put a link below. You can also just go to my website, breakfastwithbacon.com. But we'd love to see you there. Tickets are going fast. Please come see us in Virginia Beach. Great place to be. All right. So enough of that. We are going to have to go off the air. And Dan, you're so smart. I think you always remember how I do this, right?
I think so. Let me see if I can remember.
We're going to try it. I'm Dr.
Remember, I do have
Bacon.
the clueless gene to a deep, I have the clueless gene.
But you have a wife, and she's been helping you minimize that gene.
And I have a pen and a piece of paper, so I wrote the note. So let's do it. Let's see if I can remember.
I'm Dr. Christine Bacon. You've been watching Breakfast with Bacon, and I want to remind you always to live your life
Sunny side up.
Yes.
All right, I did good.
You did well.